Tonight's story is brought to you by PhoenFX. PhoenFX is a 501c3 nonprofit dedicated to helping charities with fundraising by providing them with the most innovative scarehouse and walkthrough events. They have created fully adaptive environments for the sensory sensitive so that everyone can enjoy the experience. For more information on PhoenFX and their services, please visit them on the web at www.phonfx.org. Without further ado, tonight's tale awaits you, right through there.
Welcome, my friends. Come, sit around the fire and let me spin another tale for your amusement. These tales, I tell you, these nightmares found only around the fireside, speak of many things, things which cannot be explained. Stories of the unknown, the unseen, and poorly understood. Some disturbing, yes, some terrifying, certainly. Stories of the darkness which reside in all of humanity, expressed in ways in which nature herself cannot account for, things beyond her ability and even beyond her comprehension, stories buried in time and hidden by shadow. Good evening and welcome back. Tonight's tale is one of every man's nightmare. To be accused of murder and forced to convince others that you are innocent. But in the case of Mr. Henry James, were there mitigating circumstances? Join me as we listen to his story told through the eyes of two unforgiving police detectives. Henry sat in an uncomfortable chair behind a simple wooden desk with a worn, wood-toned laminate top. Opposite to him, on the other side of the desk, there were two empty chairs much like his own. The room he was in was small, flat gray in color, and devoid of decoration. Above him, fluorescent lights flickered and buzzed. The desk he sat at was pushed up against the monotone concrete wall. On the opposite wall from the desk, a large two-way mirror was installed so they could watch him while they waited. At the far corner, but on that same wall, was the only exit from the room, a heavy security door painted in off-white with the scratches and dents from hundreds of suspects brought in for interviews just like this one. Above the door, a white globe with one all-seeing and ever-recording eye was pointed directly at him. The attorney he demanded sat next to him. He was a young man in a cheap suit. A pen and a legal pad sat in front of him on the desk. Currently, he was staring at his phone, scrolling through some news feed. Henry had no confidence in him. At best, he would get a plea deal. At worst, he would never be able to leave that cell, and this joker would go on with his life, never understanding how much damage his apathy was doing to his client. For all his college debt had bought, he was nothing but another piece of useless furniture in this bleak room painted with despair and darkness. There was nothing else in this room he could see. It was barren and clean and utterly disheartening. There was no sound in the room but of his own labored and sob-ridden breathing. It had been a long day which had devolved into a nightmarish homecoming that had led him here. It had been a long day and 2 long nights in that holding cell while the police detectives gathered their evidence against him. Life in custody was different than life at home at Eastlake. Life in the Eastlake Ranch development was usually uneventful. It was a large, planned community, typically quiet and with all the trappings of modern suburbia. It was more than just a housing development, though. It was a full community, complete with preschools, a small market, a good pizza place, and an even better Mexican restaurant. He had planned on taking Ashley, his wife, to the Luz y Limon that night for dinner. Ashley. Henry shook his head to clear his mind from that ghastly display. What he would give to just be sitting across from her beautiful smile, crunching chips and salsa and sipping on their margaritas, whose bartender had the well-earned reputation of being heavy-handed with the tequila. He would love to be sharing the molcajete in its large lava stone vessel, or ceviche, or hell, anything other than sitting here. East Lake Ranch, as large as it was and as meticulously it was maintained thanks to their prodigious HOA fees, showed a certain lack of care in its planning. It was a place designed with so little understanding that their roundabouts had stop signs. A place where the alleys behind the garages of the perfect-looking homes were so narrow that if you possessed a vehicle larger in size than your average coupe, you would need to park it in your own garage, for fear that if you parked it in your driveway, the end would stick out into the alleyway, blocking traffic and incurring the wrath of the HOA. But it was a place Ashley was drawn to, and her friends had already bought houses there when she convinced Henry to purchase their home 5 years ago, in the moderately priced section of East Lake Ranch, simply called Woodland. Henry, too, had several work friends who owned their homes there, and so it was difficult to argue against it, to argue against her. And then about a year ago, things began to change for them. It was subtle at first. Ashley had found a women's group at the community center she enjoyed. It seemed to be focused on books and crafts and the like. Soon, though, the club began meeting more frequently and sometimes much later at night at one of the group leaders' homes. Henry didn't mind this much, other than it started to cut into his time with Ashley, but she seemed happy. It was after this Henry noticed that Ashley started burning incense in the house, and crystals of all varieties found themselves into practically every room. Their intimate times had changed as well. Ashley had become more demanding in bed and took a far more aggressive role. Within the past few months, it seemed all spontaneity had left their lovemaking. It became very planned, and Ashley took great care in lighting candles and burning incense, setting the mood, as she called it. It was beginning to take on a far more ritualistic feel than simply a man and wife enjoying one another. The door at the far end of the room opened. 2 professionally dressed individuals, a woman in a pantsuit missing her blazer, and a man in a white shirt with its sleeves rolled up, chinos, and well-worn laced dress shoes entered the room. She was holding a case file and several pads of yellow-lined paper. She introduced herself as Detective Anne Klein and her partner, Detective Mark Torres. Detective Klein placed her file and legal pads down on the desk in front of her as she sat. Detective Torres remained standing in the corner next to the door. She smiled at him warmly. "It's been a rough couple of days for you, Mr. James. I promise we won't keep you longer than absolutely necessary. We just need some more information on what happened a couple of nights ago, okay?" Henry nodded mechanically. "First," Detective Klein continued, "I just wanted to confirm that the officer who brought you in here read your Miranda rights and that you understand them, correct?" "Yes." His answer carried the weight of the past few days and his sorrow. Or was it shame? Detective Torres thought to himself as Klein continued. "Okay, great, Mr. James." Her tone continued to be friendly and almost conversational. "We're hoping to gain some greater insight as to what happened with Mrs. James on February 13th. We'd like to hear your perspective so we can get a clearer picture of what occurred that day. So you know, this is merely an investigative interview to gather facts and piece together a timeline. We're recording it so we don't have to keep calling you back in to answer the same question over and over again. There are some ground rules. First, take your time in answering. There's no rush. If you truly don't know, then say so. It's okay. Feel free to correct me or add details. I'll ask questions one at a time, listen fully to your answers, and we won't interrupt each other. Again, our goal is to simply listen to you and to understand what you experienced that night. Any questions before we start?" Henry shook his head again. Something felt wrong about this. He had been brought in a couple of nights ago, removed from his home in handcuffs, and transported here in the back of a police car. Anytime they transferred him from his holding cell, they put him back into the handcuffs. And when they finally brought him here, it was in handcuffs. He had sat in this room, no longer shackled, for over an hour before these two came in. The only other interaction is when an officer offered to bring him water, something he politely refused. "If you're ready then," she continued once more, "I'd like to start just by understanding your day a little more. Please, walk me through February 13th, but give me as much detail as you can." Henry took a deep breath and tried to calm himself. "I woke up about 5:30 that morning and got ready for work. Ashley is usually still asleep when I get up, and so I tried not to wake her, just like every morning, Monday through Friday. By the time Ashley gets up, I'm usually showered and dressed and downstairs making breakfast. She came down in her favorite pink bathrobe, kissed me good morning, and we talked about the day over coffee." Henry stopped. His gaze turned inwards, looking for any relevant information he can find from his befuddled, pain-infused recollections. Already, it seemed, details were fading into the fog of suffering which encased his very being in this moment. "It's okay, Henry. Take your time. What was your day at work like?" Henry snapped out of his dark reverie with a sharp inhale. It was typical. A couple of meetings, a lot of paperwork, too much time in front of a computer or on the phone, and not enough coffee to make it worth it. Henry paused. Detective Klein prompted him. "And hers?" "She was going to stay home that day. Her work allows her to telecommute when she pleases, and she does so frequently. Especially on those days she anticipates a light workload. She said she might do some shopping, and she had her club meeting that evening. I said then I might as well put in a few extra hours at work to get caught up. I could grab dinner there, or we could do a late dinner at Lucy Limon, the Mexican restaurant at Eastlake. She liked the idea of a later dinner, so we agreed, and I went to work after we both finished our coffee." "And you two left each other on good terms?" "Yes. Ashley and I rarely fight, and we haven't had a heated discussion in months." Detective Torres flinched. Detective Klein looked over at Torres. She then looked back at Henry and smiled. "We don't hear that very often around here. It's good to know it can still be possible. Please, continue." Henry was becoming less trusting of Klein's overly friendly tone. And what was with that Torres fellow by the door? He did nothing but stare. "There wasn't much more than that. I went to work. I work for a government contractor, and we have cameras and keypad security all over, so you can easily verify with them my comings and goings from the building. I left there shortly after 6:30 and went straight home." His voice cracked towards the end. He was having trouble holding the inevitable sobs at bay. Detective Klein looked at him with understanding eyes. "Listen, I know this is where things get difficult. Take a moment, but please go on. Can we get you some water or a coffee?" "Water, please." The words were strangled by grief and had to be forcefully expelled from his throat. Klein motioned to Torres, who then left the room. Henry sat with his hands in his lap, staring at his knees through the veneer desktop. Torres returned with Henry's water and 2 coffees. Klein greeted him warmly and took her coffee. Torres resumed his perch, coffee in hand. Henry sipped at his water and cleared his throat. When I got home, I parked my car in the garage like always. Everything seemed fine until I entered the house. I heard her screaming upstairs, and then I heard a thud, and the screaming stopped. I had my gun with me, and I ran upstairs." "Henry," Klein started, "what kind of gun do you carry?" "It's an M&P Shield subcompact, 9mm. That's a good gun for self-defense. My husband carries one as well." She was lying. Her husband, a man full 10 years older than her, had just retired to an administrative position from being a detective, and still carried his Glock 17. "Please, go on." Henry took a deep breath. The scene began to play through his mind. He could feel his stomach churn while trying to formulate the words. He took another sip of water before he started again. The early morning, the long nights on the uncomfortable cot, the sheer boredom of the cell, and the events of that evening had worn on him, and his voice betrayed that. "I went upstairs and I went to our bedroom first. That's when I saw the person in there with her." His voice faltered. With Ashley. It had her by the throat and held her up high against the wall. She was unconscious, but her eyes were open. I drew my gun and fired 2 shots into it. Why do you say it and not him? Henry's eyes grew watery. The particulars of that hideous beast were not something he ever wanted to remember. He hesitated. "Henry?" "Yes, right. I couldn't tell what it was. It didn't look like a human, at least none that I would recognize." Klein shifted in her seat. Torres had become tense. "Henry, do you mean the intruder was wearing clothing that would disguise his features?" No. Henry was getting agitated. The image of the beast was seared into his mind. It wasn't wearing any clothes. "So the intruder was naked?" "Yes. No!" Henry's heart was racing now. "It's not like you or me." Klein's eyes and bearing remained sympathetic. Henry resisted looking at Torres. He didn't like the man and the way Torres looked at him. "It would help me if you could describe the intruder to me, Henry." It was lanky in build and dark-colored like smoke. It had long, bony arms and legs. Its feet were clawed and seemed to sink into the ground. At first, I only saw it from behind as it held Ashley up against the wall. That's when I shot at it. Henry paused and took another sip of water in hopes to dampen his emotions. to slow the shaking in his hands, to choke back, by some miracle or merciful act of God's, the tears which threatened to manifest with each word he spoke, and with each monstrous memory he was being forced to speak back into existence. Its body looked bony, too, not like a skeleton, but rigid and hard with strange bumps and protrusions. It was broad-shouldered and tapered down to about halfway, and then it looked like a flattened cylinder until the hips. I guess you'd call them that. Where the legs connected to the body, it was like they were just stuck onto the sides, very round at the top, and the knees bent the wrong way. Henry started shaking. His eyes were wide with fright, and tears flowed freely down his pale cheeks. "It's okay, Henry. Take your time. What happened next?" Klein's tone and manner had become more concerned, more motherly towards Henry. Her voice was smooth and a little more quiet than when they had first started. Henry had almost forgotten about Torres, who still stood in the corner holding his coffee. When I fired, it let go of her and she fell to the ground. It turned to look at me. It didn't have a face. Klein prodded Henry gently. "I don't understand what you mean, Henry." In the front of its head, it was flat, trapezoidal, but with rounded edges. It was smooth. It was white, with no holes or features or markings of any sort. Like the intruder was wearing a mask? Henry had become highly agitated now. His hands gripped the arms of his chair, the white knobby bones of his knuckles threatening to burst through the thin and pale skin across the back of his hands. No, damn it, no! It had no face. It wasn't a mask. It just didn't have a face. "Okay, Henry. Okay, I understand. This has been very helpful so far, thank you. What happened then?" Henry stammered out his answer. It disappeared, like it turned into vapor and very literally dissipated. I went over to Ashley when it had gone. She was cold, very cold, and she wasn't breathing, and there was all this blood all over her hair. I called 911. "That's a fascinating story, Henry. I have some questions about it." The tone was harsh and combative. Detective Torres had moved to the table as he spoke and sat down next to Detective Klein. He sat his coffee on the table. It made a thudding sound which surprised Henry. "It's a very creative story, one that might get you a movie deal at some point. But you've lied to us, Henry, and we know it. We've spoken with your neighbors. Your last heated discussion wasn't months ago, it was days ago, and they've been happening a lot according to your neighbors, Henry. Do you want to tell us about them, or would you like me to tell you about them?" Henry was taken aback. He glanced at his attorney, who just nodded at him, encouraging him to answer the questions from Detective Torres. Henry's tears had dried and his sobbing ceased. He was numb, but there was a growing anger at this man and his tone. "Yes, we had arguments, but not about anything in particular. Bills, finances, that's all." "Not according to your neighbors, Henry." Detective Torres lied convincingly and maintained the level of aggression admirably, at least in the eyes of Detective Klein. She had her specialty, he had his. "They say your wife was stepping out on you. They say you argued a lot about the other men coming to see her after you left for work. The way I figure it, Henry, you got sick of her sleeping around and shot her when you got home." "They're lying!" Henry's voice increased in volume. He slammed his palms into the top of the desk as he rose out of his chair. He was no longer numb. He was consumed with grief, filled with rage, and an underlying fear that he would lose everything left in his life because of this damnable neighbors who were gossiping to the police. Detective Torres matched his posture. He tapped hard onto the file in front of Detective Klein. "We have their statements right here, Henry. Do you want me to read them to you, or do you want to start telling us the truth?" There was an awkward pause as Henry stared into Detective Torres' eyes. He knew he needed to gain control of himself. He had seen the whole good cop, bad cop routine in movies and had always thought only fools would be taken in by it. But it was different when one was experiencing it. It was different when he may be charged with the murder of the woman he loved. Henry sat back down, slowly and with a metered pace as he tried desperately to regain control over himself. He knew Torres was lying to him, but he didn't know what the statements actually said. The arguments between himself and Ashley had gotten more frequent over the months and more heated in the past few weeks. He started calmly, slowly, and with more self-control than he had ever possessed in the past. "Ashley wasn't cheating on me. She would never cheat on me, and I would never cheat on her. The arguments were about her woman's club." Henry paused again, trying to keep his composure. Torres had no interest in allowing this to happen. He pressed Henry, and he wasn't nice about it. "Are you trying to tell me all of those arguments you claimed not to have with your wife were about her book club?" Henry started to get defensive again. and his worthless public defender just sat there, barely paying attention to what was going on around him. It wasn't a book club, detective. It was something else, something scary. Both Klein and Torres noted he was telling the truth. This is what the neighbors had said the arguments were about. Though he was sitting again, Torres leaned into Henry. Go on. Two little words filled with venom and accusation. Two words which let Henry know that Torres was not there to help him, but to find a way to convict him for the death of his wife. They were doing rituals. For what? I don't know. Yes, they had a book. A book. One. Henry emphasized the last word. And they all had copies of it. There was some kind of magical spells or something in there. They would get together, most of the time during the day, but sometimes also at night, and they would do their spells like some sort of coven. Neighborhood pets were starting to disappear. Klein began writing notes on a legal pad in front of her, and I confronted her on it. She said it wasn't them and that she had no idea where the animals had gone to. We also argued about her home life, sex, the amount she spent on things like salt, like 50 pounds at a time, and those crystals which were all over the house now, and the amount of time she spent away from the house with those women. Is that why you killed her, Henry? Detective Torres took out a crime scene photograph showing the bedroom and Ashley's body on the floor. Is that why you shot her? Because of how much she spent on salt or spending time with her friends? No, that's not. Then why, Henry? Because she was some sort of Satanist? Is that what you expect us to believe? The public defender finally spoke. His tone was disinterested and detached from the conversation. You don't need to answer that, Mr. Jameson. Henry glared at the attorney before turning his attention back to the two directly in front of him, meeting Detective Torres's baleful and accusatory glare, quietly seething. He then dropped his eyes and stared down at the photograph. The tears came back, and then he noticed something in the photo. Look, right there, on the bed. That's the book, right there. That's the book they all have. And look, see that on the ground there? That's salt. That still doesn't prove you didn't kill her, Henry. I told you, it was that thing that did it. I shot it, not Ashley. And yet your wife has 2 9mm bullet holes in her stomach, which seem to say otherwise. Oh, it's very convenient, isn't it, Henry? A what? A demon assassin comes in to kill your wife and then disappears after you shoot her? Henry was shaking in his chair. He had reached the end of his ability to cope with all of this. The cell, the beast, his wife, this insane, deaf security guard with delusions of grandeur, hurtling accusations at him. He was crumbling right before their eyes. He knew it, and they knew it. It's the truth, was all he could manage to say. How do you explain how the demon assassin got into the house? Did he just appear? Did it pick the lock? There was no signs of forced entry. Yours and your wife's fingerprints were the only one at the scene. No neighbors saw this demon assassin. There is no evidence of anything other than you killing your wife, Henry. Preliminary ballistic reports match the bullets taken from your wife to your gun. Detective Torres pulled the report from the file and slid it over to Henry. The only blood on the scene was your wife's. Another report was slid over to Henry. No demon blood, Henry, just your wife's. Are you really that bad of a shot at point-blank range? The public defender was about to speak again when a knock at the door interrupted Detective Torres' tirade. An officer opened the door and motioned for the two detectives to exit the room. Torres collected the reports and placed them back into the file. He left the crime scene photo in front of Henry as they exited the room. Henry dropped his head, closed his eyes. He couldn't stand to look at the picture. It was cruelty, cruelty beyond measure, and he, Henry, could not escape it. Detectives Torres and Klein reconvened in the viewing room attached to the interview room where Henry was currently sitting, with the officer who was sent in with another report. This was the preliminary medical examiner's report. The findings were stunning to both detectives. Each in their own turn read the report and viewed the remaining crime scene photos as they did. Both detectives read from the summary. Each knew they would not be able to understand the medical terminology contained within the body of the report, so the summary would have to do. The medical examiner notes the victim was brought to the morgue approximately 1 hour after reported time of death. The medical examiner notes at the beginning of the examination it appeared to him the victim had been dead for around 4 hours. The medical examiner also noted that the initial examination took approximately 45 minutes prior to the autopsy being performed. At the end of the examination, it appeared the body had been deceased for more than 24 hours. The medical examiner determined approximate time of death estimates based on rigor mortis and liver temperatures, as well as multiple contusion markers. The detectives noted how unusual this was. The ME was usually far more accurate in their estimations, even with preliminary findings. and the medics on site took the liver temp, which gave them a good approximation of time of death. Further, the struggle and the screaming was heard by the neighbors at the time Henry James had reported it. Neighbor security cameras and ring cameras captured Henry James' car arriving exactly at the time he said he did. Only one of the video cameras was able to capture sound, and the screaming was heard just after Henry James entered his home. All that gave a good time estimate, so how could the ME have been so far off their time estimates? The medical examiner reports the victim suffered a severe concussion with skull fractures combined with deep lacerations to the scalp both posteriorly and on the cranial roof. Initial examination showed blood coagulated with white powder consistent with drywall dust. The detectives looked at one of the crime scene photographs. This one showed quite clearly a section of broken drywall exposing the underlayment of wood bats and cinder block, and blood splatter at the top of the 8-foot-tall bedroom wall and ceiling. The detectives noted as they conducted their investigation this was most likely the place where the victim's head had made contact, and with reasonable force to damage the wall and ceiling. The medical examiner noted severe trauma was incurred by the victim in the cervical spine area. The medical examiner noted that in their initial examinations it appeared several cervical vertebrae were crushed, and the full autopsy report would confirm the number and severity of the injuries. Klein and Torres looked at one another, and then looked at Henry quietly weeping in the interview room. They had both come to the same conclusion without speaking. Henry was a healthy male in his mid-40s and approximately 5'10", but he was neither strong enough or tall enough to either lift the victim to the ceiling with enough force to crush her skull against the wall, or strong enough to not just break her neck, but crush vertebrae. Further, the medical examiner noted that it had appeared the victim had been strangled. The medical examiner noted multiple fractures of the hyoid consistent with violent strangulation. The ligature marks indicated it was done with the right hand, though the bruising indicated far longer than average, almost double by a conservative estimate, finger length of an average human. The medical examiner also noted at the distal end of these ligature marks were small puncture wounds, which may be consistent with a claw or talon. There were no fingerprints on the victim's neck. Lastly, the medical examiner noticed 2 bullet wounds in the lower abdomen of the victim. Given the pitch and angle of the entrance wounds, the medical examiner believes these bullets entered at a slightly ascending angle. The medical examiner noted an absence of hemorrhaging and no ichiomotic ring or noticeable swelling around the entrance wounds, leading the medical examiner to conclude these bullet wounds were delivered post-mortem. "We can't keep him, Torres. There's no substantial evidence tying him to her death." Torres shook his head. "I can't be the one to tell him." "I absolutely agree. It requires a softer touch than yours." Both detectives walked back into the interview room. Henry had pulled himself together and watched as they entered. His eyes were red from tears and exhaustion, but he met their gaze unwaveringly. "Mr. James?" Detective Klein began. "What?" It wasn't a question Henry met her with. It was a challenge. Daylight streamed in through the large bay windows and into a brightly accented white painted living room. Potted plants of all varieties decorated the room, and 6 women sat enjoying tea from cups colored in such a fashion as to match the Miami-hued furniture they currently occupied. On a bamboo-topped coffee table with rattan accents sat a tea service with all of the accoutrements one would expect: sugar, honey, cream, lemon, napkins, and multiple spoons. The women sat, casually drinking their tea and making pleasant conversation until one woman stood. She was older than the rest, late 60s, though she looked to be only in her 40s. She was dressed casually in wide-legged linen culottes and matching blouse. White leather sandals and multiple strands of colored beads with corresponding bracelets and earrings complemented the outfit. She spoke softly and cheerfully. "Ladies," she began, a little too cheerful for the somber warning she was about to deliver, "we have all heard of the terrible tragedy that had befallen our sister Ashley. The entity she tried summoning that evening to take her husband as an offering fell out of her control. This underscores the necessity of properly setting your circles before summoning. We will be reviewing the protective circles and other protection rituals once we finish our tea. It would not do to lose another sister through carelessness."
Tonight's episode of Fireside Nightmares was sponsored in part by Everbright Solutions. When you need your lighting display done by professionals and done right, Everbright Solutions is there for you. Find them on Instagram at Everbright_Solutions_LLC and also by Redicus. Redicus is a leading cross-border e-commerce enterprise with a diverse product lineup including service calling systems, guest pager systems, tour guide systems, window intercom systems, conference devices, FM transmitters, and radios. Find them online at www.retekess.com. Be sure and listen in next time for the newest installment of Fireside Nightmares. These original short stories, based on folklore, urban legends, and the odd, demented flight of fantasy, are sure to entertain and terrify. From all of us at Fireside Nightmares and PhoenFX, good night.